When it comes to international relations and their related theories, realism and liberalism are essentially the yin and the yang. Realism and liberalism are the opposite ends of the spectrum as far as a number of theories go, and as far as the way that they believe states interact and work with one another, and also bounce off of one another or do whatever it is that they typically do. So, in the case of liberalism, it is believed that the idea to making a perfect society is through liberal actions and liberal politics. Things such as democracy, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, human rights, equality, and things of that nature are imperative to the idea of liberalism. Liberalism is sometimes described by its detractors as almost a bit too utopian. And the reason for that is they think that if society becomes more equitable in all facets, then you can get rid of some of the various plagues of the world today. For example, their solution to war. War is described by Immanuel Kant in the democracy theory. The democracy theory is essentially the idea that many totalitarian and authoritarian governments are the reason for most wars, either by going to war with other countries or by going to war with other totalitarian states or by going to war with democracies. As such, the theory is if the entire planet was democratic, war would either be eliminated entirely or vastly reduced. Realism, on the other hand, is a little bit more grounded. Realism essentially believes that the state's own interests are what describe everything. And everything that happens or that states do can be described as with the interest of one state or the other. So essentially, if a war starts, it can be analyzed in regards to whose interest is served at the expense of whom. This can be used to describe things from social movements to wars to conflicts to political decisions, etc., etc. It's essentially all about the macro and the way that states go about things. Realism often believes that many things can't be changed, and they believe that things like wars are simply a result of human nature. Liberalism, on the other hand, holds that human nature is inherently good, whereas realism usually states that human nature is a little bit different, and that it's good for some, but not good for all. However, there are some contemporary challenges that liberalism and realism struggle to deal with. One contemporary challenge that realism has an issue addressing is climate change. Climate change is a pressing problem of today's society and is a problem that, depending on who you ask, could be described as existential. The existential threat that could potentially wipe out everybody. Realism has no actual way of solving this issue. Realism's belief is that states will always do what is in their best interest. Because it is not in states' best interest to solve the climate crisis, according to realism, the climate crisis will not be solved. This, however, is not a solution. If you ask the question, how can climate change be solved, or how can the climate crisis be dealt with, and the answer is, we can't because states don't care enough, that is a non-solution. A similar issue happens the opposite way with liberalism regarding cybersecurity. Liberalism is of the belief that states have the power to give people rights, and equality and things of that nature, and if they do this, then the various ills of the world will be solved. However, this isn't necessarily the case. When you're talking about cybersecurity and things like hacking or cyber terrorism, while it's true that some of these people may be working on behalf of a government that is totalitarian in nature, this is not the case for all people. Plenty of hackers or people working in, or people who end up doing things like committing cyber terrorism live in these already free and liberal democracies, and in fact it's likely that they even share conflicting ideals. As such, they commit these various cyber crimes or cyber attacks. The big issue with these particular attacks is that liberalism doesn't really address it. According to liberalism's theory, these shouldn't happen in the first place, primarily because they're coming from people who live in a country which is already ideal according to liberalism. Realism, on the other hand, actually does deal with this particular issue because they state that if it's against states' interests, then states will take action against it. But as we can see from both the climate problem and the cybersecurity problem, while both realism and liberalism have certain ideas which can be described as good and can describe how states interact in a given environment, they don't describe absolutely everything, and it may be the case that they need to be updated to be related to the modern world.